Hi, my name is Brian Ierson. I'm one of the instructors at the Computer Workshop. Today we're going to take a look at GIMP and how we can remove a background from an image. Now I have removed the background from this image in Photoshop and Microsoft Office. I'm also now going to remove it in GIMP. To start with, I want to take a look at a few things about the GIMP interface. And the first thing that I want to look at here will be the tools, and you can see that we have all of the tools visible. Sometimes you might get in here and not see your tools visible, and they're in groups. So to change that, you would go to Edit in the main menu, and then down near the bottom, you would locate Preferences. When the Preferences window opens, we're going to go ahead here and start by looking at the toolbox. So you can see all of the tools, and why I'm coming here is because I want you to see the option here of Use Tool Groups. Now right now all of the tools are visible. If we engage this, you're going to see that the tools now have compressed or collapsed, and you now have little triangles in the lower right corners of each of your tool icons that has hidden tools. When this option is engaged, and I'm going to click OK, you can see these little triangles. You can hover over the tool and see what tool that is, and you can also see the other hidden tools that are in this tool group. You can right click on that and get there very quickly and choose which tool you want to work with. Now I like to have all of my tools visible, so I'm going to go back to Edit, back down to Preferences. So in the Preferences, I'm going to go to the toolbox and I'm going to uncheck Use Tool Groups. I like to see all of my tools. I don't like to have to search. I'm in a hurry most of the time. I want everything laid out quickly and easily. The other thing that I like is to change the size of those icons. So still here in the interface group of commands in the preferences, I'm going to go to the icon theme. I like my tool icons in full color, but you can see you have several options that you can also explore and choose from. Now what I'm interested in here is down at the bottom of this screen, use icon size from the theme. I'm going to change this because right now I will not be able to use this little slider to change the size of my icons. I'm going to choose to use the custom icon size. And you can use the slider and you can see those changing. Now I don't want them to be huge because at this point I now can't see other tools that I need, but I do like them to be either large or medium depending on how much I've got going on in my program. For today, I'm going to leave this as large, making it as easy as possible for you to see what I am doing, and I'm going to click OK. All right, now the thing that we're going to start with here will be a tool called the foreground selection tool. This tool's icon shows a little person surrounded by a dotted line on top of a white box or square. I'm going to use this tool to define the area that is going to be my foreground. Now as I choose this tool, notice that the tool options below are going to come into play. So I'm going to simply start by putting my cursor into my image, and I'm going to click and I'm going to start to drag, and I want to stay close, but I don't want to get too close because then it's going to be very difficult to work with this as we continue. But I definitely don't want this to be exceedingly loose. Now when I get to the end, I want to come back over the first point that I started on. And as I go over that point, you will see a yellow circle appear to indicate that you are closing your selection and making this into a shape. Now there are points where I have come a little too close or I have made a little too wide of a selection, but that's not a big deal. We can address that shortly. Now once we have finished making that rough outline, in order to get into the point where we can now edit this, we have to tap the Enter key. And this is going to apply a mask. Now, the default mask color is generally blue, but if we look down here in the tool options, in the foreground select tool options, you can see here is this little color picker. You can come in and you can change that color to whatever you'd like. And I do want to kind of just think about this in the respect of, well, my image has a lot of this color in it, so I'm going to find a different color for this masking that really I can see very easily the distinction between what is and what is not selected, or foreground and background. Now I'm going to go ahead and switch this back to that green type of color. I find that this is very good for this, and I'm going to click OK. So I've changed that back to this color. Notice that you have a foreground select set of controls up here where you can preview the mask and then you can apply the selection. You can also click the little X to escape out of the foreground select tool. Notice as we have tapped the Enter key that our brush has now changed into a cursor for a paintbrush. We need to define or further define what will be the foreground. Now right now my brush is fairly small, and I'm going to come over and I'm going to look at my foreground select tool options. First off, I want to make sure that my tool is set here to replace the current selection. I can turn on feathering, and feathering is going to just soften the edge of my selection so that when I move it into another image or change backgrounds, that it doesn't look quite so cut and paste. The amount of radius for the feathering you want to consider is going to be dependent on the quality of the image. The higher the resolution, you can increase that feathering. The lower the resolution, you're going to want to keep that fairly low so it doesn't grab or extend out too much. I am going to go ahead and set mine down to 3. I also want to make sure that my draw mode currently is set to foreground color. If I accidentally select part of the background when I'm painting in that foreground, I can switch to the draw background to make those edits and corrections. For now, we're going to leave it at draw foreground, and then the stroke width. We can change the size of the stroke width here, and as you see when I come back into the image, my brush is considerably larger. Now I'm going to start with a large brush, and I'm just going to come across the inside of my image, and I'm not going to try and do this all in one motion. That's really going to prove difficult. So I'm just going to do a little section. You can see that all the green has been removed, and this is now defined as foreground fully and completely. I'm going to continue to draw around the edge of my pumpkins. And again, I'm not going to worry too much about being really exact to the edge right now, because the likelihood of me drawing this outside of what I really want is going to be much more likely because the size of the brush, and not to mention drawing freehand with a mouse is not always the easiest thing to do. So bear with me as I quickly go through and rough out this selection. So you can see I've roughly outlined it, and now I can just run through the center very loosely. Do I have to get every little tiny spot? No, the system will figure out that this is all included. If there are little tiny bits, it won't cause a problem. But again, I would prefer to be a little bit more cautious and try to get as much of that as I can. But like I said, if I miss a tiny spot here and there, it will not really prove to be too problematic. So you can see there, I've now got that selection. I've missed a little piece right there, but I'm not going to worry. Now, as I need to come in and paint in my foreground selection for these stems, and I want to get a little closer to the edge of my pumpkins, I need to reduce the size of my brush. Now, I'm not going to get into it in this tutorial, but you can actually make modifications to the mouse wheel so that you can control the size of your brush with your mouse, so you don't actually have to go ahead and do a lot of extra back and forth into the tool options. For now, though, I'm going to say that I'm not really going to see what I'm doing. So I am going to just zoom in on this by holding down the control key and using my mouse wheel. And that gets me zoomed into a much, much more comfortable view. So now I can just come up and I can get a lot closer to my edges. And again, little strokes make a big difference. It's really annoying if you've been working for a while and then you have a little tiny oops and you have to undo, and everything you've been drawing for the past 2-3 minutes is now just undone. It's gone and you just have to start again. That gets to be really tedious very quickly. So again, I'm going to just scroll around, come in and get as close as I can to my edge. And I'll do this in fast speed so you don't have to watch this incredibly fascinating selection process. Okay, so that kind of finishes all of my selection, but you can see I've missed a little spot here. I've gone outside and I'm picking up some background. So I don't really want to do this very often. I prefer to try and keep this as clean as possible on the first pass. But things are going to happen, so you can actually switch to your draw background functionalities here, your tools, and then come up and paint up to what you want to keep as your foreground. So you're basically just defining this as your background, making sure that there's no issue between what's foreground and what's background. Now I'm going to zoom back out, so I'm going to just hold down my control key and use my mouse wheel to zoom out. And you can see that my image is going to come in partially in view, so I'll just come up to view, zoom, and I'm going to choose to fit the image in the window. Keyboard shortcut is Control-Shift-J. So now I can see my selection, or the distinction between foreground and background, are looking really nice. And I'm going to go ahead and come into my foreground select tool options up here, the little floating window, and I'm going to preview the mask. So that you can see that really cleans up all the little fuzzy edges, although there's some still spots down here where the shadows are leaving a bit of a halo effect that I might or might not want. Now before I go ahead here and click select, I want to take a look at another thing here which is in the foreground select tool options, and that is the engine that is being used for this. There are two engines that you can choose from, Global or Levin. I honestly find that Levin seems to work a little bit better, so I'm not going to even change that to Global, but when you have time, feel free to explore your options. And then you have the number of levels. It usually defaults to 2, and the more levels that I get going on, you can see the looser and more disjointed my selection's going to be. So I find that keeping this on the lower end, usually I like just leaving it at 1. I'm going to try and make this as tight as I can. Now I can't go to 0. Doesn't do that. 1 is as tight as I get. If I want to continue working on this, I can turn off my preview where I can see this area. I'm going to turn off the preview. Again, I'm going to make sure that I'm on the draw background. I'm going to zoom in on these areas, and I'm going to just paint in that background to make sure that, or to help ensure, I should say, that this is going to be a little bit tighter and more to my desired output. So I'm just going to fix this little patch here. And you can see the difference between the more solid green and the more transparent green. Going to zoom back out to fit the whole screen. Now once again, I'm going to use the main menu view, come down and locate zoom, and I'm going to choose fit image in window. And there you can see that, and I'm going to preview the mask. Now things look a lot tighter than they did before. Now the edges are still kind of jagged because I'm not taking a lot of time to refine everything perfectly for this example, but it does give you the idea that you can go back and forth between your draw foreground and your draw background. I have never had to use draw unknown. I generally don't like to let computers make decisions of this nature. I prefer to define this myself with these two. Once you're happy with this mask, we can go ahead and come up and tap the select button. So now you can see you have the dotted lines that define your selection, and now I need to either move this up to its own layer, and I'm going to do that rather simply by right-clicking anywhere inside of my selection. I'm going to choose the option here of select, and you will see that you have an option called float. Now if you're familiar with Photoshop, when you copy something or you select it and you use your keyboard shortcut of Control J, it'll take those selected pixels and move them up to a layer of its own. We don't really have the same type of options here. We have to use this float. So it's going to copy these pixels from this layer and it's going to create a floating layer. We need to assign it to a specific layer now. So we're going to look at this layers panel, and I'm going to just widen this out a little bit. And I want to draw your attention to the three buttons that are highlighted down below. You can create a new layer and attach this floated set of pixels directly to that. You can go ahead and attach the floating layer to the layer beneath it, which would basically put it right back where it was. So that's not the option unless you have a blank layer in between. And you can, of course, decide to discard all of this. Now we have gone through all this trouble, so we're going to choose the first one here to create a new layer and add the floating pixels to that. And as we do that, you can see we now have a new layer, and I'm able to turn off the visibility of this layer, and then I can go ahead and save this as a PNG to use in other files. Well, that is it for today's little tutorial on how to extract a background in GIMP. I hope that you picked up a few useful little tips here. If you like what you've been seeing in our videos, please go ahead and subscribe to our channel. We do put out new videos every week, so please come back to see what is coming up next. And until then, take care for now.